Hello, I am RAMJB. If you are like me, the first time you fired up the demo of Task Force Admirals, your fighters got absolutely destroyed by Japanese Zeros. Well, that's hardly surprising. At least on paper, the Zero was a better plane. Of course, it's more nuanced than that, and I'm planning on a historical video about the F4F Wildcat, very short one, maybe 5 minutes to explain why the Wildcat was actually able to match up with the Zero with very similar kill to loss ratio. But besides the point, in the game, the Wildcat, even while a little bit inferior to the Zero, can hold its own, but it's more in the way that you use them than in the way that the actual plane fights. So in this video, you are going to learn how to use your fighters for self-protection and escort duties. But before that, please remember to like the video, comment, and share if you think someone else might enjoy this content. Also, if you haven't yet, you can subscribe to the channel. It really will help me a lot. Let's begin by defensive operations. In defensive operations, your Wildcats will be flying in Combat Air Patrol, in CAP. Now, how do you set a CAP? There are two things to consider. First of all, where do you place the CAP? Well, in general, and if you have seen my sea power videos, you will know about threat axis. A threat axis is the direction from which an enemy attack is most likely. So if you know the enemy is towards the north, you should put your cap some distance away from your fleet in the direction of the expected enemy attack. In the case of the last video that I uploaded, which you are seeing some footage right now, that direction was north because I already set north as the threat axis in the battle generator. Now, how far away? Well, for this, you need to consider two things. First, if you put them too close, then the fighters won't have enough time to fight the enemy before they reach the fleet. But if you put those fighters far away, then maybe if the enemy is not coming from the direction you are expecting, they will have to travel a lot more in order to engage the enemy. So you have to juggle a bit. In my experience, I have always tried to put my fighters in combat air patrol at a distance of between 40 and 50,000 yards from the carrier. Now, the second consideration, numbers. How many fighters do you want to have up in cap? Well, that depends on the expected opposition. The more carriers the enemy has, well, the more fighters you probably will need to have up at a given time. Personally, I try to put up 6 fighters per carrier. That means 12 F4Fs will be locked into cap duties. Remember, when you set a cap, you reserve twice the amount of planes that you are putting on cap. That's because the cap takes off. For instance, if you put 6 on cap, 6 planes will take off, they will patrol, and when they need to come back to the carrier will launch another 6 planes to take their place. So you have a continuous cap up. So I usually do that. I usually put 6 planes per carrier. Now keep in mind, this cap is not going to stop the enemy. Okay? This cap is, as I call it, to bait and attract. Japanese attacks will, of course, be escorted by Zeros, and those Zeros will, of course, try to keep the Wildcats busy. Well, they will try to shoot them down, but at least they will try to keep them from engaging the bombers. Now, here is where Scramble comes into play. When you hit the Scramble button, essentially the carrier that you have selected will put all the fighters they have in reserve into the air, and they will immediately move towards the enemy attack. What you want to achieve here is that your cap attacks the enemy, gets distracted by the escorting Zeros, and then a second wave of fighters, the scramble fighters, come in and they destroy the unescorted bombers. That's why my fighters usually do very well in my games, because I learned how to do this, and that's actually how it happened in real life as well. And the cap was there for an early interception, but the main defensive force would come later, would be launched from the carrier as soon as an incoming raid was spotted. Now, how do you time this? Because, of course, what we want here is for the cap to hopefully destroy some bombers, but for the most part, you want to lock their escort in place. And you want your scramble fighters to come in and sweep the place, destroy all the bombers, because the bombers will be unescorted at that state. You need a little bit of synchronization to do this. In general terms, I have found that more or less, if you order your scramble fighters to launch when the enemy is at roughly 90 to 100 miles away, then this works well. This means that the fighters will take a short while to take off, but they will be on scene on time to engage the bombers while they still are unescorted. Doing this, you will achieve massacres. You can absolutely destroy full incoming rates of Japanese planes. Of course, you have to be careful with this because depending on how many carriers the enemy has, they may send so many waves that once you launch your scramble fighters, you are without a reserve. You have launched everything. So if those fighters run out of fuel, they have to come back to the carrier. Then you are without fighters to defend yourself. So this is how I found out how to do a proper defense. Now, scramble orders have to be given by carrier. So if you have Yorktown selected, then Yorktown will launch all its reserve fighters. If you have Lexington selected, Lexington will launch all the scramble fighters. If you have more than one carrier, it's wise to scramble one carrier fighter complement at a time. That's because if later on another wave of enemies come by, you still have some reserves to launch at them. Now, one final consideration here is that, as I told you, when you hit scramble, or your reserve fighters, the fighters that are free on your hangar or your deck, they will be launched. Now, if you have a cap mission ready or working, then those cap fighters will still be busy in that cap. Remember, when you launch a cap, you have planes in the air and reserve planes on the carrier. If you don't cancel the cap, then those fighters won't take off as part of the scramble. So, in order to make my scramble fighters as numerous as possible, I always cancel my cap orders. So, the fighters that are reserved for cap, they are unlisted. So, when I hit the scramble, they are included in the scramble fighters. That way, you amass all your fighters, all the fighters that you have in the carrier will be launched defensively. The objective of your fighters on escort duties is to tie up the enemy zeros and prevent them from going for your bombers, the same way that the zeros do to you when they are on the attack. So the idea is to launch enough fighters to do that. You don't want to send overwhelming force. You are not there to kill zeros. You are not there to overcome the gap and destroy them all. What you need is enough fighters for your bombers to make it through. That means that usually you don't want more than maybe 2-3 sections. That means 6 to 9 fighters, depending on the size of your attack. Also keep in mind that a fighter that you send in escort duties is not there to defend your fleet. So you need to play a balance act here. I usually send 6 planes on escort duties. Maybe 9 if I'm launching a full attack. Now, this is consistent with American practice of World War II. In 1942, if you see the size of the attacking forces of American airstrikes, they usually were a limited amount of Wildcats compared with the number of Devastators and Dauntlesses. So remember, you want enough fighters to keep the enemy busy, but not so many that your defense is weakened. Also, if you are playing the scenario, the Coral Sea scenario, keep in mind that your fighter complements are not full. If you play a battle generator scenario, you have 24 F4Fs. In the Coral Sea scenario, you have less. I think you have 18 for Lexington and 14 for Enterprise. So if you are playing the scenario, probably you will have to send less escorts, maybe 3 tops, because If you send more, then you won't have enough planes to defend your fleet. And defending your fleet, remember, is the most important thing. It's more important to keep your ships afloat and intact than to go out and destroy the enemy. Now, a final word on offensive use of your wildcats. When you are designing your strike, between the options, you have one that is departure mode. There you have two choices: normal departure, which is the default, and deferred departure. What's the difference? Well, in the case of normal departure, your torpedo bombers, which are the slowest planes, will take off the first and begin moving towards the enemy. Then your SBDs, your dauntlesses, will take off and go towards the enemy. They are faster than the Devastator, so eventually they will catch up. And finally, last of them, the fighters, the F4Fs, which are the fastest, they will take off and they will head towards the enemy. That means that for a good portion of the travel towards the enemy fleet, the fighters will be away from the escorted planes. If at any time, for instance, if you cross an enemy airstrike which has escorts, those escorts will go for your bombers. You want your fighters on top of your bombers as much as you can. What's the advantage of this mode? Well, it's faster because your planes immediately begin going for the enemy, and it demands the less fuel consumption from your wildcats because the wildcats are the last to take off. So immediately as they take off, they are going for the enemy. The other method, which is the deferred departure, here the wildcats take off first, and they circle the fleet. Then the dauntlesses take off, and they circle the fleet. Finally, the torpedo bombers take off, and they circle the fleet. When they are all in the air, they will assemble as a joint strike, and then they will begin moving towards the enemy. What's the advantage? Well, your fighters are on top of your bombers all the way. Also, there are no mishaps. It can happen that your escorts don't find your bombers, particularly so in cloudy weather. It can happen. And actually, this is historically correct. In Midway, there were several cases of this happening. The Wildcats didn't find the bombers they were supposed to escort. And that can happen in the game as well. So by going normal departure, you are risking things. Okay? If you go with the first, then you are not risking because the fighters are already with the bombers from the very beginning. What's the drawback? The drawback is that it takes longer. Okay? It takes longer because the strike doesn't begin moving towards the enemy until they are all assembled. And then they move at the pace of the slowest plane, which is the Devastator. It also means that as the first planes that take off are the F4Fs, the Wildcats, which are the ones with the shortest range, well, they are going to be aloft. First, they are going to spend a good amount of fuel circling the fleet, waiting for the bombers to take off, which means that your strikes will have less range. Well, so here what you have to decide is whether you risk it by going normal departure and strike as soon as you can, risking the fact that for part of the way your bombers are unescorted and that maybe your escort never finds the bomber, or you take longer, you assemble properly, and you strike the enemy fleet later on, remembering that your range is shorter that way. It's a balancing act. I personally, if I'm my first strikes, they are all deferred departure. It's how I do it. Doesn't mean you have to. Again, it's a balancing act. Maybe you are in a hurry, maybe for whatever reason you want to strike the fastest as you can, then, well, go normal, but you are risking it. One final thing, and that's about FDO. FDO can be set on manual and can be set on automatic. Personally, I set it on automatic all the time. I have tried with manual, but honestly, I think the computer does a very good job at directing your fighters towards the enemy and also keeps a constant eye all the time. I mean, you as a player will probably be looking at your planes, reacting to whatever is going on the battlefield. You are not 24/7 looking at the interception screen, and you can miss something that the computer won't. So, my advice, keep it on automatic. Of course, that holds true for this demo, because in this demo, as you can see, there are several grayed out buttons that give functionality that we don't still have. In the full game, probably there will be a lot more reason to go manual. But for the time being, keep it on automatic. It does a very good job. And that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. All that I have told you is based on actual tactics that were used historically. Every advice I have given you worked in real life and works in the game as well. I hope you learned a little bit. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope this advice helps you at the time of having fun playing the demo of this awesome game. Please remember to give me a like, comment down below, tell me if you did know about all of this or is everything new for you. And also suggestions, comments that may guide me in the proper way to make more tutorials that you may want to see. If you want to support me in some other ways, well, you can do it through Patreon or by becoming a member of the channel here in YouTube. Thank you very much for watching and see you later.